By the end of this video, you will know which is better, Claude or ChatGPT. Now, first of all, let's define what I mean by comparing Claude to ChatGPT. Claude and ChatGPT are two different chatbots that encapsulate various AI models that are developed by both Anthropic, who develops Claude, and OpenAI, who develops ChatGPT. And one of the little confusions that a lot of people have is that these are chatbots that use multiple models inside of them. These are the official chatbots for both Anthropic and OpenAI, but you might actually run various models inside of them. For instance, here in ChatGPT, you have the option of looking at the models GPT-4o, GPT-4, and GPT 3.5. GPT-4 is generally considered to be the best and most advanced model. In Claude, the same is also possible. You're able to switch between what, as of this recording, is the most advanced 3.5 Sonnet, but you also have access to 3 Opus and 3 Haiku, both of which have different applications as well, but 3.5 Sonnet is currently the most advanced model. So we're going to be comparing GPT-4o against Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Even though there are likely to be more advanced versions of these models available in the near future, most of what I say today, I can confidently say will probably still be relevant then in the future than it is now. Most of the things that I compare between the two, I can pretty confidently say the things that Claude is better at will probably continue to be better at that thing for at least a little while. And the same goes for ChatGPT. The things that ChatGPT is good at now is likely to be the things that it's going to continue to be good at in the future. That said, this video is really for 2024. And if we go too far in the future, a lot of this won't be relevant again. So I'll be sure to make another video like this. But for now, we're just going to compare Claude 3.5 Sonnet to GPT-4o, as well as the tools themselves, everything that you'll find inside of ChatGPT and Claude Pro. For the things that make the most difference, I'm going to be awarding 1 point for every win. If it's a tie, I'll award 1 point for each. If it's a minor issue that I think doesn't make a huge difference, but there is a clear winner, I will make sure to specify and award half a point to that particular chatbot. So let's start with context window, and this one's pretty straightforward. All of the recent Claude models have a 200,000 token context window, meaning you can fit in roughly 150,000 words into your prompt and it still is able to understand that, which is a considerable amount. ChatGPT, on the other hand, the GPT-4o model in particular, has 128,000 tokens, a little bit less than what Claude offers. So I'm giving Claude the point here, but I'm only going to give it half a point, because for most people, having that large of a context window up to 200,000 as opposed to 128,000, it's not going to make that much of a difference. And I also expect this will be one of those things that changes very frequently, especially as we get new and improved models. This is not going to be as big of an issue in the future. Now, for a few of these next comparisons, I'd like to direct you to a blog post by vellum.ai, which has a lot of this information and was really helpful in helping me to prepare for this video. But one of the useful things that I thought we should cover is data extraction, being able to extract data from an image or a PDF or any kind of document. And the general consensus is that both of them are pretty consistent. They can usually get between 60 and 80% of the information correctly, but neither of them are really super proficient in this area, so I'm giving it as a tie to both. Next, I want to compare the speeds of the different models. Now, this is going to depend a lot on specifically which model you're using. If we're only comparing Claude 3.5 Sonnet to GPT-4o, then GPT-4o is actually the winner here, but only by a little bit, because 3.5 Sonnet is very fast to the point where it almost doesn't matter which one you use. If you're using an older model like Claude 3 Opus, that one was a lot slower, but there are also other older models like Claude 3 Haiku, which, though not as powerful as Claude 3.5 Sonnet, is actually much faster. That said, of the most popular models, 3.5 Sonnet against GPT-4o, GPT-4 wins in this case. I'm giving it half a point because the difference is so minimal. Next, I want to talk about just general benchmarks. Now, this channel is mostly about writing and using writing with these AI tools, but there are a lot of other cases in which you might use a chatbot, for instance, for coding or for math or for reasoning or any other reason out there. I am not an expert in these things, nor am I going to run a whole bunch of tests to figure out which one is best, because those tests have already been done. So I want to draw your attention to this recorded benchmark data. And as you can see, Claude 3.5 Sonnet outranks GPT-4o in almost every single category. The only one that GPT-4o is better for is math and reasoning, and I would agree from personal experience it is better at those things. But that really isn't relevant for writing, so I'm giving this point entirely a whole point to Claude. But those are the more objective markers that we can compare the two. And frankly, it's much more difficult for writing to compare the two to understand which one is better at writing, because a lot of writing is more subjective, at least according to some people. I am of the opinion that there is a good way to write. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a way to improve one's writing. So I've done my best to look through these next few benchmarks from my own objective point of view, as well as more or less compiling everything else that I've seen people say. Because while there are outliers, there is a general consensus on which one of these two models is better for certain writing tasks. The first one I want to cover is brainstorming, and I'll make this one really quick because actually this is one where either one will work. Brainstorming is one of those areas that AI is fantastic for, and pretty much any of the AI models will do. Sometimes I actually find that Gemini, another model that we're not talking about today, does actually better for brainstorming. But when it comes to Claude versus ChatGPT, all you need is something to just give you a couple of ideas when you're stuck. You say, hey, I'm writing this thing. I need XYZ, give me 10 options. And both of them will do that well and do it well enough that you will probably be able to find the ideas that you're looking for, or at least it'll get you unstuck from where you are. So I'm not even going to demonstrate brainstorming because they both do a fantastic job, and I don't really see a reason to go with one over the other. But the main thing that I am more interested in personally is how good are these models at actually writing prose, and do they sound natural? Do they sound human? Is it something I actually liked and enjoy reading? What I ended up doing is going here to Novel Crafter and selecting this story beat here for the prologue to one of my books. I then went here to where it says generate prose, general purpose, and then here to preview final prompt. This is the full prompt that Novel Crafter uses, and you can use any AI model with this prompt. But what I did is I just copied this prompt here, went over to Claude and ChatGPT, copied the prompt into both, so it's the exact same prompt, and had it generate the first 500 words of text. I specifically asked it for 500 words. Keep in mind, I usually get less than what I ask for, but we'll see what the word count here was in a second. So here are the results that I got. This was the GPT-4o prose that I got from that super prompt that was generated inside of Novel Crafter. And then over here was the 3.5 sonnet prose. The number of words that GPT-4o gave me was 585. However, all of this text that you see here that's highlighted in red was text that went beyond the prompt that I gave it. So this was basically unusable. I could cut this off, and basically this would be the only thing left that was actually what I asked for. By contrast, Claude gave me 299 words, so significantly less than GPT-4o, yet there was no going past where I asked it to go. Right here where it ends is pretty much exactly where the prompt ends. And so it didn't do what GPT-4o is known to do, which is to continue on past where I asked it to go. So that's a little point in Claude's favor. I'm not going to add it as a point right now, but that's just something to note, that even though it was less words, they were more accurate and more relevant to the actual prompt that I gave it. Everything else that you see here, all of these red marks, are parts of the text that I would fix. It was either overly dramatic or poor writing, or an instance of something I would want to cut or change or expand. The green marks, on the other hand, were sections of the text that I actually really liked and then thought I would probably keep into the final text. Everything that isn't highlighted is just basically, it's just okay, right? Nothing really stands out to me, but also it's not particularly bad either. So you'll see in GPT-4o, there is quite a lot of stuff that I would edit. We had phrases like watched in mounting horror, or gleamed with a malevolent delight, or clutched at Van Helsing's arm. A lot of these very over-the-top, sensationalized text, a lot of adjectives and things like that. Her voice was taut with urgency, a speed born of desperation, a sickening crunch. Mina's scream pierced the night, but her feet remained rooted to the ground, her body paralyzed by fear and helplessness. That's not actually very human sounding. It's not really how we write. There was this one phrase that I really liked, and this is the opening to my Dracula sequel. So it begins where Dracula ends. And so we have here this situation: with a final vicious twist of his head, Dracula tore away Quincy's neck, leaving a gaping wound that continued to pour blood. He turned his gaze to Van Helsing, a sneer curling his lips. "You are too late, old man," he hissed. So I thought that was actually a pretty good thing. A little bit violent, and I was actually surprised that ChatGPT gave me that level of violence. One of the things that it did do is it did say that this might go against their content policy. I made sure to mark that I didn't think it did, but I could see why it would do that. Claude, on the other hand, did not censor me at all for this, or even try to. Both models are censored, so that's something to keep in mind, but I have found a little bit more flexibility with Claude, believe it or not. So overall, you can see there's a lot of red here, not very much green. On the other hand, we have what we got here from Claude 3 Sonnet. There is a little bit of red here at the beginning and end. I didn't really like how it began and ended the scene. I would have needed to fresh that up a little bit with my own writing, because we had some similar AI-isms right here: crackled with tension, their hearts race, pulses pounding in their ears. Like, I'm not okay with that. But there were a lot more phrases here that I just loved. I loved the way it put things. I thought it did a much better job thinking about something realistically. So there were moments in the GPT-4o text that just didn't quite make sense to me. For instance, we had this scene in GPT-4o where it says Quincy crumpled to the ground, his hand still clutching the stake embedded in Dracula's chest. See, this doesn't actually make sense. He can't fall and still be clutching a stake that's in somebody's chest. There's just like an internal logic there that didn't quite work. And I found a couple of those in GPT-4's text, whereas Claude managed to get that kind of thing right a lot more. So we had phrases here like, in a desperate move, he thrust the wooden stake upward just as the vampire's form loomed over him. We had moments where he plunged deep into Dracula's chest where his heart should have been. So this is a good moment showing that like vampires are heartless, or at least their hearts aren't beating here. I thought that was a good catch. We had this whole paragraph that I really thought was good. At the snarl of rage and pain, Dracula's hand shot out, grasping Quincy by the shoulders. His fangs gleamed in the moonlight as he tore into the man's neck. But this was no careful feeding. It was a savage attack meant to inflict maximum damage. And I liked the nuance there, how it was like, this is not just a normal feeding, right? And it wasn't just describing something that happens all the time. This is like something unique. And that's the kind of nuance that Claude has that GPT does not. Additionally, it had some really good visual imagery, like here, blood spurted from the gaping wound, painting Dracula's face crimson. I just thought that was a good piece of imagery. This line here, where it sort of separated it by one line to add emphasis to that little bit, that's a very human thing to do, because we've got this whole thing like, no, Van Helsing cried out, springing into action. He rushed forward, his weathered hands grasping at Dracula's shoulders, trying desperately to pull the monster away from Quincy. So we've got this escalating tension, right? And then coming into one line, you can add emphasis in a way that you can't just by including it on the paragraph before, which in this case was, but it was too late. The damage had been done. And so there were a lot of phrases here that I thought were much better. Very few phrases that I consider to be at the same level of the need for editing as GPT-4 had. There was definitely less text, and some of it didn't feel as fleshed out as GPT-4's was. But the fact that so much of what it had was actually good means to me that I would rather have that to start with, and maybe I can add my own flair to it rather than having to edit all of this down from the GPT-4o Pro. So in my book, when it comes to prose, Claude 3.5 Sonnet is the clear winner. So I'll give a point to Claude. The next thing I wanted to test out is which one is better at outlining. Outlining is a common task for many writers, and I particularly find it to be my favorite task. I am very, very picky about it, to the point where I almost never use AI other than to maybe generate ideas when I'm stuck. But just to give it a chance, I created this prompt, this pretty lengthy prompt, asking it to outline a whole book for me. So the instructions went like this. I'd like to outline a full story for a novel into 40 chapters. Below, I will provide the outline template and the concept of the story. Take that concept and the template and outline a full novel, making sure to provide specific details rather than vague implications of what should happen in each chapter. That last line was very important because often I find the AI defaults to giving you very vague references to what should happen in the chapter. And so I asked it to give specific details, and we'll see which one did better in a second. Then I gave it the concept of the book. This is just one of the concepts I've had floating around in my head for a little while. And then I gave it the outline template, which is this mega thing that you can see here. This is my 40 chapter plot module, which tells you exactly what should happen in all 40 chapters of a book, built for a single protagonist for a standard length novel. If you want to get that 40 chapter plot module, I have a link down below where you can get it just by subscribing to my email address. But regardless, I went through and gave it that prompt for both Claude and ChatGPT, and it gave us the response. Now, to go back to my document here, I've gone ahead and highlighted in green the chapters that I liked, and in red the chapters that I definitely didn't like. If they're in red, that's basically an indicator that said, hey, I would not keep this at all. I would totally, completely rewrite it. Or it was a case of just being overly vague and not giving me enough specific detail to really say anything. And so this was, we'll start with GPT-4o. We had a couple of good ones here at the top, and then a couple of bad ones. The first thing that I noticed at the early start of this novel is it did a few things, like, for instance, Michael's day takes an unusual turn when a mysterious customer leaves behind a strange ancient book about mythical creatures. Intrigued, she takes it home. And then for the next couple of chapters, there's absolutely no tension or conflict in the story because she's just reading a book, really. And I found it to be a very ineffective way to tell a story. But there you go. So that was the first couple of chapters that you see highlighted here in red. And there were occasional chapters in green here that I thought were pretty decent. It had my main character have a little brother named Juan, who was an important figure to the main character. And I thought that was actually a pretty good idea, having this younger character that she wanted to take care of. But in general, most of these chapters, as you can see, are highlighted in red. Particularly towards the end here, it started going into those vague details instead of giving me specific details like I asked it to. For instance, we'll see in Final Battle, second stage, we have, as they advance, the battle becomes more difficult. Michael's leadership and the team's cooperation are tested. They face fierce resistance, but their determination and training help them push through. Subplots between Michael and her allies reach satisfying resolutions. And so you can see there's really no specific details here. It's just saying, like, this is the kind of thing that should happen in this chapter, but not actually giving me a sense of what should happen in this chapter. So there's a lot of red here. Transitioning now, in fact, I have the total red here. I counted up as 29 of the chapters I marked in red, and 7 I marked in green as things that I actually liked. Moving on to Claude 3.5 Sonnet, we have a lot more green, still a lot of red. Okay, let's be clear. I am very picky about my outlining, and I think that outlining really is one of those things that requires the human as much as possible. But, you know, this one started out really good. We didn't have the whole book issue at the beginning that we had with GPT. There was a much more interesting inciting incident and mystery and theme here. For instance, in this chapter, the mystery we have, while walking home late at night, Michael witnesses a strange wolf-like creature attacking a person in an alley. She intervenes, surprising herself with her combat prowess. The creature flees, leaving behind a silver pendant. Jake, who follows her home out of concern, tells her sometimes our true selves are hidden, waiting to be discovered. Michael dismisses this, focusing on her desire to leave town. So not everything in there is perfect. It would still require a lot of specificity for me to actually go in there and specify, but I thought the whole situation of her being in the alley and seeing a wolf creature was a much more appropriate and fit the tropes of the genre a little bit more for urban fantasy than what we had before. Then we got a couple of reds, but a lot more greens here. Definitely some plot points that I thought fit a lot better. You can see there's a lot more green here in general. Couple of reds here and there. Couple that I just didn't care about enough to label as green or red. There's still quite a bit about the ending that I didn't quite like, which is why we got these highlighted in red. But overall, I was much happier with this one than I was with GPT-4o. I highlighted a total of 12 with red and 24 with green. So once again, when it comes to outlining, and in this case, a fiction book, I have to give the point to Claude because it did a much better job in general. The next thing that I wanted to make sure we tested out was ad copy, specifically ad headlines, because I think that's one of the most important parts of ad copy. And so I thought we would test it here. We've got a few headlines that I outlined here for GPT-4o and a few for Claude 3.5 Sonnet. The prompt that I used for this was a simple prompt that said, give me 10 headlines for a Facebook ad leading to a course on how to overcome food addiction. Food addiction is a topic near and dear to my heart, so I use that as my nonfiction example most of the time. But I intentionally made this a very simple prompt to see how well it could do by default. If you were to give it a more complex prompt, like give it a whole bunch of templates of really high converting sales copy, copy and then ask it to create better headlines, those headlines would be better. But both tools are capable of doing that. And so I wanted to see which tool was better by default without giving it all of that extra prompt examples and things like that. So these were the results. As you can see, I didn't really care for most of the GPT-4o headlines. It also helped that I am sensitive to the topic of food addiction, because I was able to read these headlines and be able to instantly know whether this headline would resonate with me if I saw it on Facebook or not. And so each of these were definitely not okay. This one was okay. It said regain control of your life, sign up for our food addiction recovery course. But overall, most of these were not that great. I don't know why. Almost every AI follows this format where it has like a phrase and then a colon and then another phrase. I rarely see that on actually good performing headlines, but that's just what we often see here. I guess there's a lot of bad headlines that use that format. But Claude 3.5, there's still a bunch that weren't that good, but there were a bunch that I thought were better, more so than what we got with GPT-4o, including struggling with food, learn how to take back control, discover the science behind the food addiction and how to beat it, end the food guilt cycle, enroll in our proven program today. I especially liked the first part of that, end the food guilt cycle. Emotional eating, learn powerful techniques to overcome it. Tired of food controlling you, take the first step to recovery. I thought all of these resonated a lot more with me on this particular topic, which is why I give the point here to Claude once again. The last writing technique that I wanted to go over is proofreading. Now, I didn't have an exact test here because I found in my testing that both of them did pretty well. There really wasn't one that stood out among the other for which was better for proofreading. That said, I want to make sure we're careful on this. All of these models are generative models. They are really meant to write text, not edit it. And so I often found if you try to edit too much text, like if you give it 1,000 words or more, it is much more likely to start inventing text that you never actually wrote as it's going through the process. You're much better off to use a dedicated proofreading tool, something like ProWriting Aid, Grammarly, or AutoCrit. I have a link to ProWriting Aid and AutoCrit below if you want to get your hands on them. Those are the two that I most recommend. That said, if you keep it to small amounts of text at a given point, both Claude and GPT-4o are able to do a pretty decent job of proofreading that text and actually making the changes for you so that you don't have any grammatical or spelling issues. So this one's a tie. I give both a point. And that just about sums up everything I wanted to talk about these specific models. Let's now talk about the actual chatbot, the sort of program that these models are fed into. Known commonly as ChatGPT and Claude, there are both paid versions and free versions of these chatbots. The paid versions are known as ChatGPT Plus and Claude Pro. The paid versions also cost $20 a month. They're both the same, so there's not really any awarding of points there. But there are a couple of subtle differences in how you use the AI inside of these services that I wanted to highlight. The first we're going to look at is GPTs versus projects. Now, had you come to me a few weeks ago, before I made this video, I would have awarded this point to ChatGPT, because at the time, ChatGPT was the only one capable of doing what they call GPT. So a GPT is basically an app within ChatGPT. You can think of it as an app that does a specific task using the AI's technology. And if you are creating your own GPT, which is how I found them most commonly used and best to use, you could give it a name here, give it a description here, add some instructions specifically about what this GPT does. You could add files with some knowledge around it. So any kind of knowledge-based files that you want it to be able to access, you can put those there. As far as I know, ChatGPT is using a RAG method of prompting when it comes to these knowledge-based files, which has benefits and drawbacks. The benefit is that you can actually put quite a bit of text there, far beyond the 128K token limit. It will still more or less be able to sort through all of that. The drawback is that it loses a lot of context. So it might be able to go through your work and find a specific thing that you're looking for, but it won't necessarily be able to remember everything else at the same time, in which case I often find these GPTs forget about things that it clearly has access to, but because it's not using its full context window to look at those things, it tends to not remember a lot of things. But the fact that you could set up one of these GPTs to do various tasks that needed automation, that was a really huge boost. For instance, I was going through a project at one point where I needed to take everything that was in an article and summarize it in a single sentence. And it just got tedious going through and saying, okay, summarize this in a single sentence, summarize this one in a single sentence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I created a GPT that said, whenever I give you text, just give me one sentence that's a summary of the text. And it would do that. And so instead of having to prompt it every single time, all I had to do was copy the text, paste, it would give me a sentence. Copy the text, paste, give me a sentence. And it saved me a whole lot of time on that sort of tedious, repetitive task. And that's where I found GPTs to be very helpful, and something that Claude wasn't able to do because it didn't have that sort of setup where you could do that. But that has now changed now that Claude has introduced projects. So a project, you can come here to say project, create new project, give it a name, describe what you're looking to achieve. And then once you've created this thing, let me open one that I've already got here. You can add project knowledge to that prompt, and this will always be in its context window. Unlike the GPTs, which is using a RAG method of retrieval, this one is actually including it in your context window, so it has a much more well-rounded visualization of all of your files. The only disadvantage to that is that there is a limited amount of text that you can put here, but once you have all of those files here, you can come over here and start chatting, and it will always remember the things in this chat. Another thing you can do inside of a Claude project is edit the custom instructions. So this is the place where, for instance, if I wanted to create a project that did that summarization trick, where I give it a whole bunch of text and it summarizes in one sentence, this is where I would put that. I would say, hey, you are a helpful data entry and analyst. When I give you a whole bunch of text, condense it to one sentence. And that would be all I have to do. And that would fit into the custom instructions for this project. Additionally, one of the things that I like that I can do here in a Claude project that I can't do in a ChatGPT is very easily add content here. So I can upload a new file here to add to the project knowledge, or I can just add text content. You know, if I have, say, something that Claude has generated that I want to copy and paste into here so it remembers it all the time, I could just name it here, paste in the content here, and that would be it. And it's much more accessible to do that. And I realize that's getting a little nitpicky because you can technically do that in a GPT, but you have to like go out of it and edit it and then go in there and add it as a file. You can't really add it as a piece of text, and it's just not as useful. And just having that here where we can take any bit of text that we've generated recently and put it over here has been really useful. Another kind of quality of life improvement that Claude has added recently is this idea called artifacts. So for instance, here is something I was working on where I was trying to outline a history of storytelling. And so what I did is I gave it this prompt and I said it'll create a detailed timeline. And then instead of putting the timeline all the way down this prompt and really stretching out the response that it gave me, it made it into a little bit of a document that I can just click on here. And now that document is saved here. And it's just a little tiny improvement that nevertheless had a really good improvement on the workflow. You can also just copy the contents of just this section here, and you won't copy any of this extra fluff that you see in the intro or the outro. You'll only get the actual result that it gave you here. And so that's just a little small improvement that I thought was really good, and it kind of came along at the same time as these projects. So all of that to say, while GPTs are great, and they were for a long time, they were the only way to do certain things, I have found that Claude Projects, now that those are out, is a slight improvement on what GPTs offer in terms of the actual workflow that I go through. And this was actually the main thing that sort of tipped me over the edge into saying that, yeah, I really like Claude, and I started using it much more than ChatGPT. All right, but I know there are a lot of you out there who are big ChatGPT fans, so don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you. There are some things that ChatGPT is much better at. The first and probably foremost of these things is image generation. Claude does not have any kind of image generating tools inside of Claude. ChatGPT does. It has a model called DALL-E 3, which allows you to generate any kind of image inside of ChatGPT. So while I am going to give the point to ChatGPT on this one, I am going to say that the quality of DALL-E 3 at this point in time is kind of behind all of the other image generators out there. So if you really want good quality image, I would just say go with Midjourney or with any of the others, Leonardo, Ideogram. There are a bunch that I would consider superior to DALL-E 3 in many different ways. However, if you want just an all-in-one platform that does everything, ChatGPT has that capability and Claude does not, so we'll give the point to ChatGPT. The next thing I want to talk about is the differences between the free versions, because a lot of people don't have the money to pay for the pro versions, so we wanted to make sure that we have the right type of access at the free level that would make one worth more than the other. And this is another one that I'm going to have to give the point to ChatGPT as well, for one reason and one reason only, and that is because these GPTs that you see are actually available in the free version of ChatGPT at this time. They didn't used to be, but now they are. Whereas the projects feature inside of Claude is a paid option, so you are not able to get access to the projects inside of Claude. That said, the models inside of Claude I still believe to be superior in the writing, so I would still go with Claude over ChatGPT for most writing purposes. But if you need to have a GPT of some kind, the free version of ChatGPT is going to be where you want to go, because you can't really set up a project inside of the free version of Claude. Thankfully, they both have a free version, so you can use both if you want, if you're not paying money. However, there is another caveat for both of these, and that is if you're using the free version, you're going to get throttled a lot more. The speed of the models is not going to be nearly as fast, and you are probably only going to get a limited amount of prompting in before it will say, you've done enough, come back later. And both of them tend to do that at the free level. I've heard a lot more complaints about Claude for this, but I haven't actually run into any sort of limitations myself with Claude. So you'll have to let me know in the comments which one ends up throttling you more at the free level, whether that's ChatGPT or Claude. But all in all, we're giving this point to ChatGPT. The next point that I'm going to give out has to do with internet access and whether they have access to the internet to check, say, more recent facts. And in this one, ChatGPT wins out as well because it does have internet access, and Claude currently does not have that access. So another point to ChatGPT. However, I'll have another caveat for this one, and that is that when it comes to internet access, I don't actually use either of these. I use another tool called Perplexity, which I find to be immensely superior, not just to Claude or ChatGPT, but I actually use it in place of Google these days, which is saying a lot. It's a much better tool when it comes to accessing the web and summarizing things for your convenience, and also giving you the links to go and check those answers that it gives you. So that's just a little bit of extra recommendation there. I would not use either of these tools when it comes to searching the web. Last but not least, we have text-to-speech and voice chat. This is another thing that only ChatGPT has at the moment. I find it to be very limited. I don't currently use it. I am looking forward to the future where they integrate that a little bit more seamlessly, as they have promised to do. I really want to have my Jarvis who I can just talk to openly about various topics, but that currently is only available in ChatGPT, and the more advanced version of it that we got hints at in previous press conference, those are things that we have yet to see from ChatGPT. Claude currently has none of those things, although I would not be surprised if we get it in the near future, especially with Amazon being a huge investor inside of Claude. The reason I think this would be a good thing for Amazon is if they integrate it into Alexa somehow. I think that could be a really big boost for Alexa. I don't have any kind of home automation system. I am intentionally waiting for one of the home automation systems out there to basically announce whether they are incorporating AI in a more conversational way into their product, because I would love to be able to hook up my Claude account or my Gemini account or my ChatGPT account to any of those services. So I'm waiting to see which one does it first to help me decide which one I want to get. That said, I don't think this is a really big issue. And even though I do think ChatGPT wins, currently this is not a deal breaker for me. And so I'm only going to award half a point for this particular feature. So if you've been keeping track of the points, then you'll see that I do believe Claude is the natural winner over ChatGPT. However, it is a fairly close race. And I could totally see with new expanding models that this could change very quickly. I'm most concerned about the actual quality of writing and how natural sounding and human sounding it is. And for that, I have to go with Claude overall. I do think that it is far superior for creative writing and even for just more natural sounding writing, even in fiction, nonfiction, and things like that. So I highly recommend working with Claude and seeing how well it can work with your writing. ChatGPT is a decent option as well for many different applications, but in general, if I could only pick one, I would pick Claude. And in fact, that's what I did. I actually recently canceled my ChatGPT subscription because everything that I needed it for, I could usually get out of the free version. I wasn't pushing it enough to really need the plus version. And I just really appreciate the paid version of Pro so much more. And it tends to be the thing that I go back to over and over and over again. So I decided, even as an influencer in this space that needs to have access to a lot of these tools, I decided it was time to cancel my ChatGPT subscription and go with Claude instead. Now, earlier in this video, I briefly demoed a tool called Novel Crafter, which I consider to be one of the best tools to take these models and actually use them in a way to help you write. If you want to know more about that, I have a video all about Novel Crafter over here. Definitely go check that out so you can learn more about it, and I will see you in the next video.